Hi, Manley. Thank you very much for joining us on the YOD pod. You're no stranger to UK Doc, a patron of the charity, and already done a huge amount. So it's great to be chatting to you today. Selfishly, I'm really excited for this conversation because I look at your life and some of the things you've done, and I think that's amazing. So I want to hear as much as possible for my own interests, but I'm sure it will be fascinating for everyone listening. So thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks, Tom. Thanks a lot for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And I'm also intrigued to hear some stories from you as well, from your rugby career, being a very keen rugby man that I am. So my absolute pleasure in any way that I can support UK Doc. And I like the idea of the YOD pod, a nice name.
Well, one of the things we might have in common, I was thinking, is when I look at some of the things you've done, and I listed a few in the introduction,
Yeah.
but it might be a bit of an insatiable thirst for excitement. And that was certainly something I probably had throughout my playing career. Is that something you still carry with you at the moment?
I definitely have a low boredom threshold. Without any doubt at all. And I know I'm not very good at sitting still. So I know I don't know where it came from necessarily, but I've always had this sort of way of working that if I'm not enjoying something, then I will look to try and do something else. So, I'll work with something then whilst it's exciting and stimulating and invigorating, brilliant. And then as soon as maybe I start losing a bit of interest because my boredom, I then think, okay, well, let's just see what else I can do. What skills have I learned here that I can apply over here? And so I kind of like that change, if you know what I mean. It's part of my psyche.
That is interesting because a lot of people are not that way inclined, as in change is actually scary. Do you encounter that fear of pivoting and going somewhere else and thinking, oh, this is new and I'm bored of the old thing, but the new thing I might fail at, or I'm, might not be as fun? Is that something you encounter and overcome?
Well, yeah, it is interesting because not everything has worked. I certainly haven't had a beautiful path going in one direction or going uphill. There have been times in my life when it has fundamentally gone quite dramatically wrong. There's an expression that, whether it's right or wrong, which says security nullifies ambition. And what we mean by that, if our focus is just to be secure, the danger is we could potentially get trapped where we are. Whereas if you're following something which is closer to your heart and to your interest, then if there's no such thing as failure, something may not work out as you thought, but you'll learn, and you'll learn a lot on the way. And so, yes, I've made quite a few mistakes, shall we say. But I don't think that's a failure in any way. It's sort of given me the experience that I have now, which means I'm doing what I'm doing now. And it's like everything in life, isn't it? It's all part of that journey.
Do you think you could bring to mind some of the more formative of those experiences, or the times, the mistakes, not the failures, as we said, but the times where things haven't worked out as you necessarily planned or wanted them to, but they turned out to be brilliant learning moments?
Gosh, we may have to do another couple of podcasts just on the screw ups that I've done in life. It's interesting. I mean, even the word fail is interesting. My daughter's school, when she was younger, I do remember they used the word fail, F-A-I-L, as first attempt is learning. And if you think about a child learning to walk, does the child know they can do it? No, because there's no comprehension whether they can or not. Do they want to do it? Yes, they do want to do it because they're looking at us, the parents, walking around on two legs thinking, well, that's much quicker than crawling. So there's a desire to want to, but there's no knowledge that they are able to. And they'll fall over many, many times. They'll hurt themselves in the process. And it's funny, isn't it? Because we talk about resilience in the modern world, but actually the children are full of so much resilience because they keep falling over, they keep hurting themselves, they keep getting it wrong, they keep getting mistakes, but they never stop. And there's some lovely thoughts in that. And so maybe that's part of it, if you like, that you go out there, you experiment. Sometimes it works, and that's brilliant. Other times you don't get the result that you're thinking of, and it may well hurt you physically, mentally, emotionally, financially, whatever it may be. And it's how you carry on that course, carry on, if you like, on another course, but take it as a lesson, as a learning, and don't sit back and feel sorry for yourself or some of that, I guess. I mean, I guess that's part of the psyche involved in flitting around quite so much.
Because that's a nice thought, that the resilience, we're actually born with the resilience, aren't we?
I think we are,
in our humanity.
And there's a lot about resilience. I've done a lot of research in it, and in the second edition of my book, it's a new chapter on it because when I look at that and analyze, well, why is it that the children learning to walk, the smaller ones, later resilience can go because of other aspects, but at that time in their life, they're not worried about outcomes. They're not worried about future. They're not worried about the perception of other people. They're not worried about someone looking at them and laughing if they fall over. They don't worry about what happened yesterday because that's already gone and out of their mind. All they're focusing on is that moment. And I think resilience comes in that moment too. And because that moment is deeply aligned to their sense of this is what I want to do, in other words, their sense of purpose or meaning or direction, falling over is just part of the journey. They're not distracted, if you like, by anything else. But I think as we grow up, and certainly from about 8 years old, when we realize we're being judged by society, we tend to worry more about what other people may think or what might happen in the future, or what we did or got wrong in the past than we do in the present moment. And I believe that's one of the concerns around us being resilient as adults, is all the concerns of other things around us, which actually we can't influence. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I can't influence what you think of me, Tom, or anybody else for that matter. I'm just Manley. And I certainly can't change anything I've done, no matter, even if I thought I wanted to. It's just being now, isn't it? I think as adults, we're losing the ability to be truly present. And I think that's a lot to do with being present is really useful for our resilience and our well-being, and our sense of psychological health too.
I think you've unpacked that really nicely, and certainly experience that I have had is the coming into adulthood, and it's almost actually got more difficult in some ways in my kind of mid to late 20s, coming to early 30s. I've just experienced you have to wade through more of the rubbish before you can then get back to that sense of self and your own journey. I guess that was the most recent kind of big stumbling block, or what people would have deemed as failure probably, was the last Olympics. So this was quite towards the end of my career, but we came fourth, which is traditionally not somewhere you want to finish in Olympic Games.
Off the medals.
And people are very, and I've sort of fully processed it. But even now, if I talk about it, people only want to talk about when we won a medal 4 years previously or 5 years previously. And it's a really strange insight into people's psyche. And that people are doing it because they think it's going to be tough for me to talk about. Let's not talk about fourth place. Let's talk about when they got a silver medal. Yeah. That's the external sort of pressure or expectation that we're talking about. And that was why initially, when we came out the back of that Olympics in Tokyo, it was incredibly difficult because a lot of the emotion we were wearing at that point was as a result of external standards and standards that we'd probably imposed on it, other people had imposed on it, and we had to really process that stuff.
And society does. There's a lovely story I heard literally just the other day about Tim Henman's, the British tennis player who got to number 4th in the world. His response when someone said, "Oh, Tim, do you think you're a bit of a failure because you're never first?" And his response was, "What are you the 4th best at in the world?" And I thought, oh, what a nice reply, because I'm not the 4th best at anything. I'm not even the millionth best. Maybe if I'm lucky, I'm in the top 100 million best at something. But, so how often do people actually reach the dizzy heights of being number 4 out of 8.5 billion? It is an extraordinary undertaking in its own right, and we forget that. But then I think I was running a workshop just this week, actually, down in Angola in Africa, with an amazing group of business leaders and entrepreneurs down there. A fantastic organization called the Young Presidents Organization, and we were talking about the concepts of success and failure, and I introduced a beautiful model on motivation by a guy called Dave McClellan, who was back in the 60s. And it says we have a balance of 3 needs between achievement, affiliation, and influence. achievement, getting stuff done, making sure you're hitting your goals, affiliation, being part of a team and making sure the team is strong, and influence is maybe about growing and learning and applying skills elsewhere. But the danger though, Tom, and it reflects in people's comments to you about the Olympics, is that we've made achievement the only allowable motivation. So look at our school system. It's all about what grades you get. It's not about what character you are. It's not about who you are. It's not about do you have the skills to fit and work in society? Can you relate? Is it about teamwork? Even the way we do sport to a degree. Yes, the teamwork's massive, but it's all about are you the winner or the first loser? And you take it from that and then into education system and then into work, where each company is trying to eat somebody else's lunch. So you're trying to win at the expense of others. And we've created a society which essentially only motivates 1/3 of the whole of the society because we're motivated differently, as opposed to allowing, if you like, the more natural motivations that within us all to blossom and be respected too. There's a real focus on just achievement. Life is more than just achievement. It really is.
I think that wisdom is so valuable to try and carry, even, and maybe especially for people who are ambitious, people who are drawn to achievement. When society is kind of fueling that, it's even easier to lose sight of the other thing. And a lot of people that are listening to this will be ambitious people. There will be people in the medical profession who are trying to, go through their careers doing a good job, not just because they want to succeed on their own career path, but because the nature of the work is very important and you want to get it right, more so than any line of work that I've been in.
100%. Yeah. And I'm saying that's the thing with healthcare, particularly, or any industry where there's a very high vocational element. I mean, education is very similar too, because your whole personality is involved in the delivery of what you do. You join healthcare because, well, the clue's in the name, isn't it? Care and health. You actually want to care for people. You want to add value. You want to make a difference to people's lives. And that's why you train extraordinarily hard to become a doctor or a nurse or any element around that. Or that's why you volunteer to work in the service at every level, because you're adding value, you're giving back to society. So there's a huge level of personal engagement in your work, which is why, as we experienced, when there are any frustrations in your ability to deliver, which may be systemic, maybe organizational, there may be whatever, then the healthcare professionals feel the pain because it's very close to who they are. And that's an absolute recognition, as we know, for the industry.
Do you have that sort of personal passion in terms of what you do now and what you've done in terms of setting up the Compassionate Leadership Academy? Is that a passion for helping others as well?
Yeah, I think it is deep within my psyche. I know I have a stronger need for affiliation and influence than I do achievement, for example. So when that is a strong need, affiliation is being part of a team. I love working with people. I love being people. I think I'll be a very poor hermit. I really would. And then the influence bit is I love helping other people grow or seeing other people blossom. So, when I'm doing stuff, it's not about me receiving praise. If I can help a team grow, if I can help a person grow, if I can help any individual, or hey, not even just individuals, if I can help an animal survive or be in a better place, then it feeds me. So I wouldn't say that I have such a clearly defined or powerful sense of purpose as a medical professional might, but I know that I'm not very good at doing stuff which doesn't align to who I am. So if you ask me to do a job which doesn't fulfill my motivation, I know I will struggle. I can do it short term, but long term, I really couldn't. So, so maybe that is a key driver for me, that it is actually always essentially purpose driven around my sense of what I think that purpose might be, has been a very powerful motivator for me.
And I want to come back to that in terms of what it means for being a leader of a group. There'll be people listening to this who are leaders in their own area. But just staying with this, the concept of being closely aligned to your role, your day-to-day, and your passion being in that, and dealing with success and failure. How have you managed to, I was going to say, how do you separate yourself when things don't go right? But we've talked about sort of failure and not getting it right quite a lot, but it's the same with success, right? On both occasions, for me, if we win or lose a game, to an extent, I need to not be totally embroiled and wrapped up in that outcome. How do you manage? Do you have steps where you sort of separate yourself from that?
I think it is interesting. There have been periods in my life where I've been too focused on the outcome, and I've struggled personally. I remember a very good friend of mine who's been a mentor, as a senior person to myself, has helped me enormously over the years, and just making sure that it sounds weird, and I know it's a Buddhist philosophy of detaching yourself from the outcome, because if you're so focused on the outcome, you forget how to get there. You start doing things wrong, if you like, or against your character, or against your values, in your desperation to reach the outcome. As opposed to thinking, well, hang on, the outcome's great. That's my direction. If I keep on the path, and I keep working on the path and improving the path and making myself fitter and stronger on the path, or making the path easier, then the outcome will come. And it's fascinating as we try, and I get in my work on compassionate leadership, for example, and it's something I've been working on for a long while, and it is now a big passion of mine, to say the least. I see not just business leaders, but I see healthcare leaders. I see leaders in community desperate for the outcome, for performance. We all want to perform better. We've all got more things to do. We've got less time to do it. We've got less people, less budget, and there's more and more pressure to perform. And so the danger is we focus more and more on the performance, on the outcome. And as a result of that, we lose our way. And we also tend to put more and more controls in place to measure the outcome. And there's a lovely expression that says, you don't fatten a pig by measuring it. You actually got to feed it. And the danger is we're so focused on the measurement, we forget about the feeding. And if we can just, it's like life, isn't it? I mean, the destination, the outcome is death. It doesn't sound like fun to me. No, let's focus on the journey. And the danger of losing track on the journey is that we lose our way mentally, physically, literally, but also psychologically. We can lose our way. We can find ourselves doing things out of our own character in a desperation to reach performance. So my whole work on compassion is to focus on the journey. And if the journey is compassion, and compassion, I use the Dalai Lama's definition of compassion, which is that if empathy is to understand, compassion is to work with that knowledge with positive intent. In other words, it's understanding with positive action. Now, that is huge. That means, as a leader, you've got to go in and shut up to begin with, and listen and understand without judgment, understand with intent to then act positively with what you do. And if I understand you, Tom, and I'm then acting positively with everything you're telling me about yourself, what happens is that I actually tap into your sense of self-worth. I gain your trust. I gain your commitment. And this is the point. It's all around commitment. Because if I've got commitment, someone's commitment, then I've got engagement, I've got communication, I've got collaboration, I've got ownership and accountability, which also gives me innovation. I've got well-being, I've got resilience, I've got happiness, and I get performance. So everything I do with people is say, don't chase performance. Our role is to gain commitment. And I don't just think that's a leader's role too. And when I apply this to healthcare, there's so much misuse, I believe, of where we're applying compassion. There's so much saying that we need to be compassionate to the patient, and it's patient first and this sort of stuff. But I disagree, because if you like, it's almost like playing cards. That gets you on the table. You only joined that service because you are compassionate to the patient. That's why you are there. So to overemphasize that is almost to say to people, why are you here? This is why you're here. You've got to look after the patient. They know that. Everyone is desperate to do that. But what we're not doing is being compassionate to ourselves. We're not being compassionate to the healthcare professionals. We're not being compassionate to each other within healthcare, even within the teams, because there's a sort of competitive element to try and evidence the performance bit. So if we can break out of that and rebuild the concepts of compassion as it's meant to be, understanding with positive action, internally, to myself, to you, to our colleagues, to the staff, to all the healthcare professionals, and just help them be the best place they can be. The mental shifts we need to make, not just in healthcare, but I also believe in society generally, that rather than chasing the outcome, rather than being focused so much on the outcome, let's focus on the journey. And if our journey is one of compassion, understanding with positive action, Wow, what an exciting place that would be.
Manny, that's brilliant stuff. It's absolute gold and very relatable. It's really interesting when you talk about compassionate leadership, because this is something that I had on my mission statement. So as a captain of the team for a long time, I actually wrote out what I kind of captain I wanted to be. And compassion, I think, is something that I had a lot of naturally, and it's the way I wanted to behave naturally, but I didn't initially understand how that fit into leading a group of young men, because what I saw a lot of and what I thought I had to emulate was a lot of kind of very, it felt authoritative, but it was very assertive, and probably there wasn't that much listening. There was a lot of telling. And so I didn't understand how the two things were compatible. When I finally realized what a super strength compassion was in terms of connecting with people, thereby being able to lead people, it was fantastic. But often when I talk about it, people think about compassionate leadership being the leader projecting compassion down almost, but they forget about them being compassionate inwardly. And actually, what does that look like? But it's difficult, right? I mean, in the day-to-day, especially in the healthcare profession, when you are so jam-packed with pressures and the stresses of life, and a timetable that doesn't allow for space and pause, what are some things, this is something I tend to ask a lot of people, what are some things, some strategies that allow you to maintain that self-compassion?
And that's a really good question, because yes, it is difficult, but also, as you said earlier, it is also naturally within us. I believe we are born with that compassion, with the understanding and the positive intent. I believe that deep down, the psyche of humanity is a positive one. I know we're a hugely aggressive animal. I mean, you just look at the devastation we do to and have done over the millennia to any species that gets in our way, and likewise with each other. But certainly within our own groups, we have that natural desire to empathize and feel as one, and it's how we translate that into action. And it's lovely using the analogy, or the reality, shall I say, of you leading a team of young, fit, active men in a very competitive environment, which is looking to win as an outcome. I mean, you play sevens internationally to win for your country. You don't play sevens internationally to turn up for your country. You want that gold medal, if you like. You want the cup at the end of the series. And so you'll push yourself very hard. And you're quite right. The danger is we think because it's performance, then it's all about shouting and screaming and pushing and using the stick and this sort of stuff. Whereas it's lovely to hear, and I'd love to interview you actually, and hear about your experience and the revelation. Yeah, we can do version 2, exactly. Yeah, and so we can, rather than thinking, well, actually, yes, we've got to push ourselves. Yes, and we need to get more out of it. Yes, we've got to totally perform. But actually, I don't know about you. I perform best when I'm enjoying myself. I perform best when I'm in a good place myself, mentally, physically, psychologically, all those things. And we forget about that. We know it's a reality, but we forget about it. And one of the dangers I see, and this comes back to answering your question properly, I'm sorry I'm being a little bit long-winded, is that in our desire to serve other people, we compromise ourselves. So when I'm working with healthcare professionals or any people actually matter, because I see lots of busy people everywhere, and there's a room of people, I say, well, put your hand up. If everyone in the room gets that 7 or 8 hours sleep, you know you need to get every night. Now, put your hand up if you know you do get to the gym and do the exercise you need to do. Put your hand up if you do eat all the things you know you should eat, rather than just grabbing that snack out of the canteen as you rush past at whatever time in the morning. Put your hand up if you spend time on your own hobbies and your own thoughts and ideas. And people's hands very rarely go up, and maybe 1 or 2 of those. And this is the tragedy, that in our desire to serve other people, we compromise ourselves. And so if you think of our behaviors like an iceberg, there's the bit at the top is what people see, and everything is driving our belief. So people are seeing us, and the healthcare professionals work really hard. And the belief behind that is, I must serve my people. I must care. I must be compassionate. I must go for good outcomes for their healthcare. I'm trying to look after the patient. I'm desperate to make sure I get that surgery right. I'm desperate to make sure that that ward is clean, and all these things are happening. So we're driving, the belief is almost like the horse in George Orwell's Animal Farm. I must work harder. I must work harder until we become ill. Whereas, if you like, we need to change a behavior. We need to change behavior. So go from one iceberg to another iceberg And the new behavior, this is the old behavior, is I'll work myself until I'm ill to look after the patient. The new behavior is actually, I'm going to look after the patient, but I'm going to look after myself. And the new belief is I can serve the patient better if I am in a good place. I think this is the breakthrough I think we need to make in healthcare. In other words, what we need to create is not just the internal awareness and spark, but the collective support for self-compassion. I meet people in the healthcare industry a lot. As you know, I'm doing work with the YOD, and I've got a pilot project in Brighton and in Plymouth to look at changing the culture, but it's about changing the internal culture first, to let healthcare professionals of across the whole board. I'm not just about doctors and nurses. I'm talking about the whole organization, the whole systemic organization, to be good to themselves first, to be kind to themselves, to don't beat themselves up, to recognize that the people you're dealing with are humans and you're a human too. You're saying to your people that you're trying to fix, hey, take some rest, but we don't take rest. And I know there is pressure on us, and I get that, and that's a bigger systemic thing. But if you and I are working together, Tom, and we know each other well, understanding, positive action, and I see that you're really struggling, that even just having a few minutes, having a little conversation with each other, grabbing a quick cup of coffee and saying, hey, are you okay, doc? It's such an important concept. Having someone that can listen and you can unwind, even don't just rush back. Maybe take that little moment to, I don't know, if you're in Brighton, park the car down the beach, get out, sit on the pebbles just for 10 minutes. It doesn't have to take hours and days for us to try and resettle and rebalance. But look at what we're eating, analyze ourselves. And yes, I know I've got to grab a snack, but maybe with a little bit more effort, I could prepare a meal before I come out, which is a healthy one. I don't know, there are lots of different things we can do. But I think the first thing's got to start with self-compassion. We need to help all our healthcare professionals realize that they will better serve the world, and therefore they will feel better if they're in a better place themselves, if you know what I mean. It's a virtuous catch-22. Yeah. As I'm better, I serve better, I feel better, I'm better, so I serve better, and so we grow. Instead of this bit where, unfortunately, and we see it a lot, of the concept of the healthcare professionals' self-sacrifice in their desire to positively change the outcomes of the patients and the communities that they work in, which is admirable, but it's painful and it comes with a price, as we know.
And it's not sustainable,
not at all,
in any way. And it's, you're absolutely right. And there's a phrase that I often turn to when I think about this stuff, and it's a really nice anchor for me, and it's just, you can't pour from an empty cup. And it works for me because I think it makes me think about all the things that just top up my cup again, and then able to give of others.
And that's actually really nice. I like that. Can I borrow that one, Tom?
You can have that one. But I think it's absolutely right what you're saying about if we see our days through this lens of self-compassion first, and it just makes minute changes here and there. Even if you are grabbing a quick snack on the way through, you choose perhaps a slightly healthier one that's not going to, you only have to make tiny little shifts here and there sometimes. And a big one of that might be, breathing. I mean, you talked about presence and the importance of being present already. The breath is a fantastic one. And I mean, I came to learn and understand about that most through trying to get better at goal kicking. Turned out actually being better at goal kicking was not that important, but being aware of my breath has become massively essential for my well-being.
Breath work is so extraordinary. It's something which one of the joys of what I do for a living is I meet extraordinary people, like yourself, like when I'm working in healthcare, I meet so many extraordinary people. Not only people who are amazing in their field or just beautifully humble and normal, but also people who are thought leaders. And the learning on breathing, the understanding on breathing, again, it wasn't new, was it? Because what would your grandmother say if you're going to get angry? She'd say, hey, just take 3 deep breaths. It's not new concepts. It was, if you like, it was ancient wisdom that our breath had a massive impact on our ability to think, to be clear, to control. And it's ancient wisdom, if you like, that we've lost in our strive to be more modern and technical and whatever it might be, more scientific, we're losing the contact with the reality of the humanity and how incredibly linked we are internally, but also collectively. Now, if I'm slowing my breathing down, the people around me will start slowing theirs down too. There's a subconscious link, which is extraordinary. And even just the square breathing is a brilliant one. In for 4 seconds, hold for 4, out for 4, hold for 4. It just calms you down. And I know special forces people use it and stuff. So, it is extraordinary. You're right. And all these little things we can do. But, Tom, we can only do them if we're being conscious. And there's an extraordinary book called Man's Search for Meaning by a guy called Viktor Frankl. I'm sure you may have read it. He was a psychiatrist and a Jew in the Second World War, and unfortunately was incarcerated in Auschwitz in the concentration camp, but survived and wrote a book and then carried on his studies amazingly. And in it, he was saying that his captors could take everything away from him apart from him. They can't take himself away from them and his absolute choice, which he did have. And the point he made is that between stimulus and response, if you have a gap, you have choice. If you don't have a gap, you have no choice, because then the response is driven purely by your subconscious patterns of behavior, which are protective and not necessarily useful. But if we can make a pause, which is why your grandmother would say, take 3 breaths, in that pause, we have a chance to be conscious of our emotion, to rationalize our response, to be more aware of the environment, be more aware of the other person. So yeah, these little small things we can do for healthcare professionals. As you're being more aware of how are you feeling, instead of suppressing it, saying I'm a professional, I'm going to get on my job, it's recognizing that actually I'm feeling angst, I'm struggling, I'm feeling whatever it may be. And then just saying, well, you know what? Just for 10 seconds, I'm going to moderate my breathing. I'm going to slow it down, put it deep in my chest, less in my throat, just doing these little things and little occasions. And even instead of grabbing that chocolate bar, grab something slightly healthier. It's just a consciousness to do it, isn't it? So somehow we have to help the healthcare professionals raise that consciousness, because then that's what's going to give them the choice.
And what we're talking about here is probably more geared towards well-being and sustainable behaviors over a long period of time. But I kind of want to just sort of almost draw the parallel here between performance as well, because when we're talking about the gap between stimulus and response, essentially when you're making high-level decisions, high-performing environments, whether that's sport or medicine or on some of the adventures that you've been on, I'm curious if there's a story you might come to mind on that, where there's been, you felt a certain way, perhaps it may have been with, I don't know, on the around the world on the yacht, or going to the North Pole, but when there's been a moment where you've wanted to act a certain way, but the correct way, or the way you I don't know how to describe it, but your real sense of self wanted to behave in a different way, and you're able to maintain that space and act accordingly.
Nice one. So yes, I do have quite a few examples. On the bit to the North Pole, we did run into a polar bear. We saw. I
was hoping you were going to talk about the polar bear.
Yeah. So we bumped into a mother and cub, and she was, because the mother in instinctive natures look after a cub, she ran away. So possibly we were overconfident that polar bears would continue to run away from us. And we made the mistake of, not deliberately, of surprising a young male polar bear. Now, we found out later, we're looking at the tracks, that this bear had been tracking us for about three days. They permanently live in hunger. The males don't even hibernate. So even winter, they're searching for food, and they need a lot of food, as you can imagine. Their world is around smell. And bear in mind that we've been on the ice now for 3 weeks without any showers or cleaning. Smell wasn't going to be an issue. We're going to be easy to track, that's for sure. And we came around this big iceberg, and no more than 100 meters away, there's a young polar bear just there, which is walking towards us. Now, they make an instant reaction when they see their prey with very little conscious interference. So the stimulus and response bit, which allows them to be so successful. If they think, yep, that's the prey, I'm going to go for it. And that's their amygdala in their brain kicking that off. And we have a similar response in many ways too. But as we came around, it wasn't just one of us came around the iceberg, 3 of us came around, it caused a small pause. And in that pause, the polar bear thought, hang on a second, all right, no, okay, that's good. That's still food. And I'll come forward, but a little bit more cautiously. So instead of sprinting at us, and a polar bear, even though it weighs 350, 400 kilograms, can actually run 50 meters in 4 seconds, Tom. So, I mean, you know the speed you guys do in sevens and your acceleration, but 50 meters in 4 seconds. And the joke is, how fast you have to be to run away from a polar bear, only faster than your mate is the answer. Unfortunately, I was with two Royal Marines who are both 8 years younger than me and brilliant skiers. So I would have been the polar bear food. So we both paused when we saw each other. The polar bear took slightly less time to think because there's slightly less going on in the cortex area, and pressed the advance and kept coming towards us, moving in a zigzag, focusing on the scent. And we just took a pause and, right, polar bear. And this is when I talk about compassion isn't a soft thing. It was only through compassion that both us and the polar bear stayed alive. And let me explain. So a polar bear lives with hunger. Eating 4 people is around about 140,000 calories. So eating 4 explorers is a lot of calories for a polar bear. Normally the polar bear's prey runs away, and they can do 50 meters in 4 seconds. So we're thinking, right, there's a couple of things. We can run away. That's not going to work. The polar bear wins. We die. That's not a very compassionate outcome. We could shoot the polar bear, and if that ever happened, I could never tell the story, and that wouldn't be a compassionate outcome either. We can then try and ignore the polar bear, but that wasn't going to work. So we had to do something different. So we took our sledges off. Chris got his skis to make a big noise. Phil got the gun, and I actually got the camera, so got some great video of it. And so I thought, I'm not doing anything else. And rather than run away from the polar bear, we all just looked at each other, and there was a subconscious agreement that we just all started walking towards the bear. So we're closing the gap on this incredible animal whose world it is. It's the Arctic is their world, not ours. It's there at home there. We're trespassers. And as we're closing the gap, we're making a lot of noise. We're firing a shot above its head. And it got to a certain stage where our behavior was so unusual that it was enough to trigger him out of his instinct, and he just wandered off. And so that's compassion, understanding with positive action. Because we understood the polar bear, we were positive with it. The bit about the instinctive reaction, when you first see a polar bear, without any doubt at all, in my mind was, oh shit. It was, there's a polar bear, beautiful, but, and then you think, well, actually, no, because actually, I wouldn't have a chance anyway if I did run away. You also, and this is something you'll recognize, Tom, playing in a team, you're looking at your 2 colleagues and thinking, they've got my back, I've got theirs too. And I will not put them at risk. And so when you're in that real strong collaborative sense, when you're in a team environment which you created as well, Tom, where there's that understanding at a deep level, you have a common endeavor, you've worked hard to get there and be there. You have a very, very high levels of understanding and trust between you to a degree, and we do see it in sport, and we hear it talked about in sport, that you almost instinctively know what your mate is going to do. It's like when you see some of the All Blacks and play with keeping the ball alive and just throwing it around, or the Fijians in the sevens aspect. They know if they throw it over the shoulder, one of their mates will be there, because they have that almost subconscious, subliminal way of communicating. Those moments are very powerful. And those moments help you get over that instinct, because you now know you don't just have responsibility for yourself, but you have a collective responsibility. And maybe that's one of the joys, but also one of the problems we have in healthcare too, that our colleagues in healthcare who are struggling have a sense of guilt that they don't want to let the rest of their team down. And that potentially is one of the problems we need to try and get over too. And that's a tricky one. And you'll know it in sport, if you're slightly off your game or your fitness isn't quite there, you're feeling bad that you didn't quite get to the breakdown in time. You didn't quite get to the bit. Your support lines weren't as strong as they should be. On the North Pole bit, fortunately, we stuck together. We were there. We all did the right thing. We lived and the polar bear lived. But it's a really good thought and a really good analogy to use. How much pressure do we put on ourselves in our desire not to let our colleagues down? I mean,
Mm.
Tom, you'll know that from your sport.
Well, yeah, 100%. And I think I remember someone once pointing out to me the difference between guilt and shame,
Right.
and that it was okay to experience some guilt if you felt you'd fallen short of your own standards. I think importantly, those standards have to be inputs within your control. So, have I done the training that I was supposed to do?
Yeah.
And have I put in the amount of effort that I deem is the right amount of effort that I want to put in? And anything beyond that is outside of your control. So if you've fallen short of those standards, then I think it's okay to feel a bit of guilt, because that's you holding yourself accountable. The shame comes in when you're belittling yourself and almost taking away your self-worth because of that. And it's almost forgetting the humanity thing, which you mentioned earlier. And it's one of the biggest barriers, I think, in any team, certainly in any, particularly in professions like sport, where there's a degree of creativity and self-expression required to
Yeah.
be your best. Not only on reflection, but also in terms of inhibiting performance. I've seen people often fall short because they are scared of letting people down. And it might be letting their teammates down, but often it's letting parents down, or loved ones down as well. So these people who we can feel motivated by, and often that's the team around us, we feel like that's our safe place. But almost the other side of that coin is the fear of letting those very people down. And it's a fear that is not ever that useful in my experience. I think it drives you to some extent. So, if you're in I don't know, this is not a serious example, I suppose, but you might be doing fitness work and you really want to stop. Sometimes if you're by yourself, maybe you would stop. And I think that the strongest people don't, because it's all internal, but some people find they get motivated by people next to them. And if your teammates are still going, you'll keep going as well. So that's valuable. But yeah, it can also be an inhibiting fear.
And I think this is, again, where compassion comes in, right? Because it's self-compassion. But now if we create a culture of compassion, understanding with positive action. So I love your point that I may well have gone wrong. I may have done something not right, whether it's I'm a sports person or an explorer or a healthcare professional. And I may feel I've let the team down or let the patient down or whatever it may be. But hang on a second. In my mind, I must say to myself, but Manley, you trained, you put all your effort in, you med school, you got all your exams, you know, all your training, all your CPD. No, you're prepared. You've done everything you can do to be the best you can be. It may well be other circumstances, you say, outside your control, which has meant that something hasn't quite happened. So this is where we need a compassionate culture, as opposed to just the self-compassion. Because if our culture is one of blame, for example, or lack of support, not even as strong as blame, just not particularly supportive, then the danger is that guilt will become shame, because the guilt bit is my internal stuff, and the shame bit is almost the elements of self-esteem, which is being attacked externally. And so when I make a mistake, my colleagues look at me and go, "Oh, Manley, what have you done there? You're an idiot." You can see it in some sports pitches as well. When when the team starts blaming each other, the team has fallen apart. They're no longer a team. And sadly, my experience in healthcare and working with healthcare professionals is that there isn't a hugely internally supportive culture. A lot of the culture has been driven to be quite individual or exclusive, or benefit at the expense of other. And I think there's a wider case to think, well, if we could just, even just in small teams, Tom, but if we just worked with that unit, that floor, that ward, and created a culture of compassion within that ward, where we look at each other and we recognize that you've done the hard yards, you've done all the training, you've done it at work, you're on a 12-hour shift, you have been working hard. And I've done the same, and we respect that with each other, and we're compassionate with each other in that one. So when you make a mistake, I know it wasn't a mistake of intent. I know it wasn't a mistake of effort. It potentially could have been a mistake of competence, and that's another story. I know about training and stuff, but it could have been just a mistake because of tiredness. It could have been a mistake because something else wasn't quite right there. So rather than beating you up, I'm going to support you. Now, if you knew that was the case, if you knew that when I make a mistake, my team are going to rally round me and support me and help me, they'll give me a bit of hard time later on, but not in that moment of importance. In that moment of importance, we'll rally round. Later on, they'll give me a slapping and I'll have to buy them a beer for dropping the ball or whatever it might be. But in that moment, you know they've got your back. I think that's what helps it and stop it moving to shame and stop it moving to anything worse. Because you've got a little bit of guilt in yourself that I could have done that better, but you can move on knowing that none of your colleagues are beating you up in that process. And I think that's part of this journey. And again, I think one of the reasons why I'm very excited by what happens with UK Doc, because that's part of the journey, the message that UK Doc is saying to healthcare professionals. It's okay. We're not doubting your intent. We're not doubting your compassion to the patient. We're not doubting all the training and hard work you've done. We're not doubting your character. That is without doubt. All we're saying is you work in an environment which is hugely, hugely pressurized and stressful in a place where you are desperate to serve. And that service is being compromised in a culture which could be better, to be honest. And every healthcare professional I've spoken to also agrees on that one. It's not some outsider trying to impose my idea what it could be. It could be more supportive. And if we can create that element of, don't worry, I've got your back, I think we'll make massive strides. And I think that is very much the part of the work of UK Doc, is to listen to understand without judgment, and definitely without judgment on character, but just recognize that this is the reality of the situation we're in too.
Manley, I think that might be the perfect note on which to wrap up this conversation. The time's absolutely flown by, and I feel like we might have to follow up on that
Yes, please.
angled offer of a second round. But that was fascinating. We've covered a huge amount there in that time. Some brilliant stories. We talked about being present, the importance of breath work off the back of that, about fattening the pig by feeding it.
Yeah, stop measuring it.
Taking that one. And also collective support for self-compassion, which, as we've said, is so important in any environment, and a great story about the polar bear. Yeah, Manley, thanks so much for your time today.
Give you a story about the sailing, so maybe we'll have to come around for round two.
I think it's good to save something back for round two. We'll promise the listeners that now. Thanks very much, Manley. It's been brilliant talking to you.
My pleasure, Tom. My pleasure. And the work you do with UK Doc is fantastic. So well done for doing these pods, mate. Absolutely brilliant. And a real pleasure to be part of it. So thank you.